Hello, I'm Michael Serapio. In October of 2012, the Canadian government introduced Bill C-45, a bill that made changes to the legislation contained in 64 acts or regulations affecting Indigenous peoples. Concerned about Native rights, 4 women in Saskatchewan began exchanging emails about the bill. That started an online movement called Idle No More. As the movement grew, a national day of action was planned for communities across Canada. Then Chief Teresa Spence, chief of the Attawapiskat First Nations, announced she would start a hunger strike that would last until the government agreed to meet. As CBC reporter Adrian Arsenault reports, Idle No More was growing into something bigger.
It is, as it seems, close enough to see Parliament Hill, but too far to feel a part of it. Now, where better than to hold a protest about political detachment? Chief Teresa Spence of Attawapiskat. She sounded the alarm last year for a community in danger. Now she's going further. 8 days into a hunger strike that's all about resetting the relationship between the government and First Nations communities.
We're saying that this government means he's mean and aggressive.
Her demands? A meeting with the highest powers in the land. She says she'll starve until it happens.
I'm willing to, die for my people.
One woman, but not one protester. One of dozens popping up across Canada, on highways, on legislature steps, in city centres, even flash mobs at malls. These are actions rooted in problems generations old, including the desire to protect the land and resources from grabbing hands. But what's happening now was organized quickly and organized online. Idle No More is the Twitter handle fueling a movement that has a whiff of Occupy. Watching the conversations track across Canada, the reach seems wide. Self-determination or self-termination, writes one. This is our time. We must stand together, retweets another.
I heard last night that it was trending.
Behind the concept of Idle No More, women learning new respect for social media's capacity to engage.
I think what makes this different is that it spans across all communities, all demographics, all across Canada and internationally.
The faces and now the images of the movement, created by a young man who says he never considered himself political until he saw the Idle No More conversations online. The feather, the fist, the smartphone. It seems he's on to something, getting requests from Indigenous communities globally.
Brazil, Puerto Rico, people in LA, they've been able to connect with it as well.
Now, Idle No More's next big day, if you will, is Friday, with events planned across Canada and in spots around the world. And if the turnout is what they suggest it will be and hope it will be, then it's possible that this might just be the beginning of something.
Those involved in the movement were concerned about the changes to existing legislation and what it would do to the environment and Native rights. They were also angered by the lack of consultation. As the campaign grew, protesters organized a day of action, and it spread not just across the country, but around the world. Cameron McIntosh reports.
The point of the protests here and across the country wasn't to be aggressive. It was certainly, however, assertive.
We'll put our heads and our arms up to them.
In Manitoba, it was the blessing of water to mark a movement sparked by resource rights.
The people's minds are changing. The people's hearts are changing. They're saying that we don't need you to approve us anymore, government. We're approving ourselves.
Idle No More was a Twitter response in protest to new legislation many say removes environmental protections enshrined in treaties. It quickly grew into a movement, a sort of catch-all, for a relationship Aboriginal Canadians have long said is broken. So today, a day of action, including a round dance at one of Toronto's busiest intersections, a demonstration on the side of a New Brunswick highway, and in Ottawa, busloads of people undaunted by a snowstorm. A grassroots demand for a new dialogue with the government now being taken up by Aboriginal leaders demanding meetings with the Prime Minister to reassert treaty rights. The government says it sees no need to go that far, but is willing to hear out leaders' concerns.
That's the responsible and reasonable way to work through this process, and we invite those leaders to continue to sit down with us and talk about their priorities.
Clearly there's a disconnect over that. Meanwhile, Idle No More shows no signs of idling. That hashtag just keeps going, trending again today in Canada and getting noticed worldwide. From a lone protester in Cairo to a demonstration at the home of the British Crown, which signed those first treaties, even in Los Angeles. All of it very encouraging to people who have suddenly found themselves inspired.
I so totally believe that this is the time for change.
And while Idle No More is proving itself to be a loud call for change, many also concede that trends fade, and that the biggest challenge for Idle No More might be keeping it relevant and inspired, especially through the holidays and into the new year.
As support for the movement grew, demonstrations continued daily across the country. But not everyone was happy. Many citizens ended up in the line of fire while trying to go about their daily lives. And as Ron Charles found out, that may have cost the movement some support.
I suggest you stop your truck. Stop your truck!
The Idle No More blockade on the QE2 highway into Edmonton went beyond testing the patience of some drivers. The woman behind the wheel of this truck said she'd had enough waiting in traffic.
It's a poor way to get your point across. Stopping people when they have things to do there's other ways to go about it.
Eventually she was let through. The chief of the First Nation that organized the protest called for cooler heads and a traffic slowdown instead of a blockade.
We don't want to have an incident like we just had a little while ago, so we want to keep it peaceful, let them through one at a time. We want to give them information.
But full blockades were popping up elsewhere in the country during this Idle No More day of action. On a main freight rail line outside Portage La Prairie, Manitoba, for one, with a freight train stopped just a few hundred meters away.
I think it's only appropriate that we're here today to protect our earth, the land and the resources that are out there.
Another blockade by just a few masked protesters in Ontario disrupted Via Rail passenger service between Montreal, Ottawa and Toronto. Hundreds of protesters supporting Idle No More blocked part of Windsor's Ambassador Bridge, the busiest trade route between Canada and the U.S., leaving dozens of truckers waiting for about an hour.
The tires aren't moving, we ain't making no money.
But not all of the demonstrations were disruptive. In Winnipeg, protesters marched to the provincial legislature. In Toronto, a few dozen held a rally and drum circle. Today's events are meant to highlight demands that range from an end to poverty on reserves to stronger laws to protect the environment. Day of Action participants say their message is getting through to the public and politicians.
The message is being heard because we've been in the media every day for 6 weeks, and now we have international attention.
We're getting support from Colombia, New Zealand, all over the world.
From Queens Bench, Winnipeg Center.
On that blocked rail line in Manitoba, CN obtained an injunction today to clear the tracks. The protesters expressed their disdain by throwing the injunction on the street. They committed to stay for 72 hours, but left by late afternoon. Ron Charles, CBC News, Toronto.
While Idle's momentum did continue, as members of Parliament returned to work after Christmas, the protesters were there. The ongoing demonstrations were a message aimed at the government about Aboriginal rights and land treaties. As Duncan McHugh tells the National's Peter Mansbridge, another National Day of Action brought out protesters across the country yet again.
That's right, Peter. As MPs returned to Ottawa, so did Idle No More protesters by the hundreds, saying their fight is far from over.
Not far from Parliament Hill, the TP and Chief Teresa Spence are gone. The hunger strike done. Still, people gathered, vowing to keep up pressure, saying the government must honor Aboriginal and treaty rights. This group traveled 2 days to get here from Kashechewan, a northern Ontario First Nation plagued by unsafe drinking water in the past, now worried about development in their territory.
It's so precious, the land is so precious, so I'm trying to protect it and say no to a Harper government.
This was dubbed a global day of action, an attempt to keep up the momentum of over a month of protests.
We just have to stay focused. We lose focus, then, it would become pointless.
An attempt to show Idle No More as more than just a First Nations thing.
Not just First Nations people, but as you can see,
all nations are here today.
Back in Ottawa, this NDP MP introduced a bill seeking to hold government to international standards on Indigenous rights. In effect, a veto over laws impacting First Nations lands.
That those laws respect and be compatible with the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples.
We'll continue in the streets, we'll continue in the courts, we'll continue at the United Nations. We will not rest until we achieve this change for our people.
Inside the House,
canceling thousands of environmental assessments over the objections of First Nations is not meaningful consultation.
The Prime Minister insisted First Nations consultation is taken seriously.
Mr. Speaker, we will continue to work with those positive partners who seek to make progress.
As for those demands, National Chief Sean Atleo took to the Prime Minister just weeks ago, asking for sweeping change on everything from treaty rights to revenue sharing. A follow-up meeting was promised, but no date has been set.
As of late February 2013, that meeting has still not taken place. And while protests do continue to pop up across the country, the Idle No More movement seems to be calming down, at least for now. And that is News in Review. For more on this story, please check out our website at newsinreview.cbclearning.ca. I'm Michael Serapio. Thanks for watching.